igniting hope. Days stretched into weeks, and weeks slowly became months. Pedro battled the brutal elements with no protection, left exposed to the blazing heat and fierce storms. He managed to survive only by eating turtles that wandered onto shore and drinking rainwater that pooled inside their empty shells during the storms. As time dragged on, Pedro tirelessly searched for a way to build a fire. He knew it wasn't just for cooking his meals, it could also serve as a beacon to alert ships passing by. The shore was littered with seaweed, driftwood, and pieces of wreckage, plenty of possible fuel, but it was all useless without a way to create a spark. His knife could act as the steel, but the real struggle was finding a suitable stone. The island was hardly more than a stretch of sand, empty, harsh, and unwelcoming. Each day, Pedro scoured every inch of land, hunting for something that could ignite a flame. But he kept coming up empty. There was no flint anywhere. Refusing to give up, Pedro turned to the ocean. Being an experienced diver, he began searching the seafloor, hoping to find anything resembling flint. Dive after dive, the search continued, until finally, he surfaced with two stones that had just the right texture and appearance. His spirits lifted. Back on shore, he ground the stones together, shaping a rough edge. With a pile of dried seaweed already collected, he now had his improvised flint and steel. He struck the stones against his knife again and again. After several tries, a tiny spark jumped, landing on the tinder. It caught. The fire came to life, its flickering flames providing warmth and light, a precious triumph over the endless loneliness. For the first time in months, Pedro tasted a warm meal. That small comfort brought a spark of life back to his soul. Pedro Serrano, Castaway of the Forgotten Sea. Because of the story's ancient origins, only limited verified details exist about Pedro Serrano's birth or youth. What historians do know is that around the middle of the 16th century, Pedro, a Spanish mariner, embarked on a journey as part of the crew aboard a trade ship navigating the Atlantic Ocean toward the Americas. However, this journey would quickly spiral into a living nightmare. One dreadful night, a furious tempest struck the ship with devastating force, tearing it apart. Everyone aboard lost their lives, everyone except Pedro. Gifted with strong swimming skills, he fought through the waves and eventually made it to a remote, lifeless island off the northeastern edge of South America, far removed from any usual shipping lanes. Though the exact island remains unidentified, many believe Pedro washed ashore on Serenilla Bank, a lonely, sandy atoll located in the Caribbean Sea. When he regained consciousness the next day, Pedro was hit with the terrifying reality of his situation. The land around him was bleak, barely any plants, just patches of grass and a few scattered trees. Most troubling of all, there was no source of fresh water. The odds of survival were grim. Determined, Pedro scouted the barren isle and the coral reef nearby in desperate search of something edible. He discovered a few shellfish, barely enough to keep him going, and had no choice but to eat them raw. While this gave him temporary nourishment, he understood that lasting survival on the sandy outcrop would require a more reliable food supply. Fortune briefly smiled on him. While exploring the shallow waters of a nearby lagoon one day, he noticed turtles gliding near the shore. He instantly knew what that meant. They would likely come to land at night to lay eggs. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Pedro concealed himself behind a cluster of rocks, waiting in complete silence as night enveloped the island. Time dragged by. The tension was thick. Then, at last, the turtles began crawling from the surf onto the sand. With his knife, an invaluable item he had managed to salvage from the shipwreck, Pedro sprang into action. He captured and killed several turtles, using their meat to nourish himself and their shells to store rainwater, which, though infrequent, became a precious resource that often meant the difference between life and death. The unexpected visitor. Enduring 3 long years on the remote island, Pedro managed to stay alive. During that time, his clothing completely deteriorated, and his hair and beard grew into untamed lengths. His body adjusted to the severe climate, developing a rough layer of body hair that offered some shelter from the wind and sun. He often spotted ships far off on the horizon, but none noticed his desperate signals. The isolation was nearly unbearable, and we can only imagine how his days melted into a constant rhythm, hope surging at the sight of a ship in the distance, followed by crushing sorrow when it sailed away without seeing him. Then, one life-changing morning, Pedro was jolted from sleep. Squinting through the smoky haze of his campfire, he saw something that made his blood run cold, a face peering through the smoke. It was human. The man, like Pedro, was Spanish. He had been shipwrecked the night before and managed to survive by clinging to a piece of floating wood until reaching the shore. As the man moved closer, both of them were seized by terror. The stranger was unsettled by Pedro's wild, animal-like look, while Pedro, haunted by years alone, was frightened by the sudden appearance of another human, unsure if it was real or some ghostly trick. Gripped by fear, both men fled in opposite directions, believing the other to be some evil illusion. In his panic, Pedro screamed to the skies, begging for protection against what he believed to be a phantom. Hearing Pedro's anguished cries, the stranger stopped, recognizing the language and the emotion in his voice. "Brother, don't run from me. I'm a Christian, just like you," he called out. Hearing the words and sensing the truth behind them, the two castaways came together, reassured by the realization that they were both human and not hallucinations. From that moment, they began sharing the burden of survival. Together, they developed a new rhythm to life, tending to the fire, gathering seaweed, fishing, and collecting driftwood. With two pairs of hands, they were able to flip and catch larger turtles, which provided a more dependable food source. Years continued to pass, 4 more in fact. The men often watched as ships appeared and disappeared in the distance, their hearts sinking when no help came, despite their rising smoke. Then, one miraculous day, a vessel sailed closer than any before. The two men frantically piled more fuel onto the signal fire. This time, it worked. A small boat detached from the ship and rowed toward the island. Overcome with joy and desperation, Pedro and his companion sprinted across the sand to greet their rescuers. But their shaggy, unkempt appearance shocked the sailors, who initially thought wild beasts were charging them. Pedro and the other man shouted in Spanish, trying to calm them. Eventually, the crew understood. They weren't monsters, but fellow countrymen who had survived unimaginable solitude. Both men were brought aboard the ship, which was on its way to Spain. Pedro later told the incredible story of how he managed to survive 7 grueling years on a deserted island. Sadly, the journey home proved too much for his companion, who didn't survive the voyage. Once again alone, Pedro carried with him the pain of their ordeal and the memories of everything they endured together. Sometime after the year 1550, Pedro finally returned to Spain and was joyfully reunited with his family, who had long thought him lost to the sea. For the rest of his life, Pedro shared his astonishing tale, a testament to human strength in the face of despair. His saga, recorded in the royal commentaries of Peru by Garcilaso de la Vega, remains a chilling yet inspiring account of perseverance. It reminds us how thin the line between life and death can be, and the incredible strength it takes to survive. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable tale of endurance. If you found Pedro's story moving, subscribe for more real-life adventures and stories of human survival. Until next time, take care and stay strong.